Nobody wanted to play with the billionaire's deaf daughter until one poor little girl arrived and performed a miracle that no one could explain. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel. The autumn leaves danced outside the towering windows of Riverside Elementary's main hallway as 34-year-old tech mogul Michael Harrison watched his 7-year-old daughter Emma sit alone on the playground bench, her small fingers tracing patterns in the sand beneath her feet. Her honey-blonde curls caught the afternoon sunlight, but her bright green eyes held a sadness that pierced straight through his heart. "She's been sitting there for the entire recess period," Principal Matthews said softly beside him, her voice carrying the weight of countless conversations they'd had about Emma's isolation. "The other children, they just don't know how to interact with her." Michael's jaw tightened as he watched a group of girls Emma's age run past, their laughter echoing across the courtyard while his daughter remained motionless, invisible to their world. 6 months had passed since Emma's profound hearing loss had been diagnosed following a severe case of meningitis, and despite the best hearing aids money could buy, she remained locked in a world of silence that none of her former friends seemed willing to enter. "What about the sign language classes I funded for the entire 2nd grade?" Michael asked, his voice barely containing his frustration. "Didn't that help at all?" Principal Matthews shifted uncomfortably. "The children learned the basics, Mr. Harrison, but it's different when you're 7 years old. They want to run and play and chatter, and with Emma." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Communication requires patience they simply don't possess yet." Through the window, Michael watched Emma pull out a small wooden horse from her backpack, the same toy she'd carried everywhere since losing her hearing. She began moving it through the sand, creating elaborate pathways and jumps, lost in a solitary game that broke his heart a little more each day. Before her illness, Emma had been the center of every playgroup, the child who organized games and brought others together with her infectious giggle. Now she was a ghost, moving through a world that had suddenly become foreign to her. "There has to be something we can do," Michael said, his reflection in the window showing the desperation he tried so hard to hide. "I can hire more specialists, bring in interpreters, build a dedicated playground section." "Mr. Harrison," Principal Matthews interrupted gently, "sometimes the solution isn't something money can buy." As if summoned by their conversation, a small figure appeared at the edge of the playground. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, with tangled dark hair and clothes that had seen better days, stood hesitantly by the gate that separated the school grounds from the public park beyond. Her sneakers were worn thin, and her jacket, clearly a hand-me-down, was too big for her tiny frame. Michael frowned. "Who is that?" "She's not one of our students." "I don't recognize her," Principal Matthews replied, moving closer to the window. "She shouldn't be on school property during class hours." But before either adult could react, something extraordinary happened. The little girl spotted Emma sitting alone, and without any hesitation, walked directly across the playground toward her. Michael held his breath, expecting Emma to be startled or frightened by the stranger's approach. Instead, Emma looked up from her wooden horse and smiled, the first genuine smile Michael had seen from his daughter in months. What happened next made both adults freeze in astonishment. The little girl sat down beside Emma and, as naturally as breathing, began moving her hands in what was unmistakably sign language. Not the stilted textbook gestures the other children had struggled with, but fluid, confident communication that made Emma's eyes light up with something Michael had thought was lost forever. Pure joy. "That's impossible," Principal Matthews whispered. "We don't have any families in the district who use sign language as a primary form of communication. How would that child know?" But Michael wasn't listening anymore. He was watching his daughter laugh, actually laugh, for the first time since the world had gone silent around her. The two girls were deep in animated conversation, their hands dancing through the air with an ease that defied explanation. Emma showed the stranger her wooden horse, and the girl responded with such enthusiasm that Emma clapped her hands together in delight. "I have to meet this child," Michael said, already moving toward the door. "Her parents, her family, whoever taught her to sign like that. Mr. Harrison, wait!" Principal Matthews called after him. "We need to find out who she is first, how she got onto the grounds." But Michael was already hurrying down the hallway, his heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in months: hope. Through the window, he caught one last glimpse of the two girls before rounding the corner. Emma was teaching the stranger something with her wooden horse, and the little girl was nodding eagerly, her hands forming responses that seemed to come from some deep, inexplicable well of knowledge. For the first time since Emma's diagnosis, Michael allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his daughter wasn't destined to be alone after all. By the time Michael reached the playground, the mysterious little girl was gone. Emma sat alone again, but everything about her had changed. Her posture was straighter, her eyes brighter, and when she saw her father approaching, she signed something that made his heart skip. "Daddy, I made a friend." Michael knelt beside his daughter on the sandy ground, his expensive suit jacket forgotten as he struggled to keep up with Emma's excited signing. Her hands moved faster than they had since before her illness, animated by an energy he'd thought was lost forever. She knew all the words, Daddy, all of them. Even the hard ones Mrs. Peterson taught me about feelings and dreams and... Emma paused, her small brow furrowing in concentration. She knew words I don't even know yet. "What was her name, sweetheart?" Michael signed back, glancing around the empty playground for any trace of where the child might have gone. "She said her name is..." Emma's hands hesitated, forming letters slowly. L-U-N-A, Luna, like the moon. "Did she tell you anything else? About where she lives or how she learned to sign?" Emma shook her head, but her smile never faded. "She said she's been looking for me for a long time, and that she'll come back tomorrow if I want her to." Principal Matthews appeared at Michael's shoulder, slightly out of breath from hurrying across the playground. "Did you catch her?" "We need to speak with her guardians about proper visitor protocols." "She's gone," Michael replied, helping Emma to her feet, "but apparently she's planning to return tomorrow." "Well, that's unacceptable. We can't have random children wandering onto school property, no matter how helpful they might be." Principal Matthews consulted her clipboard with practiced efficiency. "I'll contact the elementary schools in the surrounding districts, see if anyone has a student named Luna who might have wandered over here." As they walked back toward the school building, Emma tugged on her father's sleeve. When he looked down, she signed something that made his blood run cold. "Daddy, why did Luna look so hungry?" That evening, Michael couldn't concentrate on the quarterly reports spread across his home office desk. Emma had gone to bed an hour early, exhausted but happy for the first time in months, and the house felt different somehow, charged with possibility and questions that had no easy answers. He pulled out his laptop and began searching. Luna wasn't a common name in their suburban district, but he had resources most parents didn't. Within an hour, he'd run searches through the enrollment databases of every school within a 20-mile radius. No Luna matched the age and description Emma had provided. His next call was to Dr. Sarah Chen, Emma's therapist and one of the leading experts in childhood hearing loss in the state. "Michael, is everything okay? It's nearly 10 o'clock. Sarah, I need to ask you something that might sound strange. Is it possible for a child to be naturally fluent in sign language without formal training?" There was a long pause. "You mean like a hearing child whose parents are deaf?" "That happens all the time. Children pick up their family's primary language, whether it's spoken or signed." "No, I mean a child with no apparent connection to the deaf community. A child who signs with the fluency of someone who's been immersed in it since birth, but has no obvious source for that knowledge. "Michael, what's this about?" He told her about Luna, about the impossible conversation on the playground, about the way Emma had lit up like a Christmas tree for the first time since her diagnosis. When he finished, Dr. Chen was quiet for so long, he wondered if the call had dropped. "That is highly unusual," she finally said. There are documented cases of children displaying remarkable aptitude for languages they've had minimal exposure to, but sign language is different. It's not just vocabulary, it's spatial, it's cultural. It involves a complete shift in how you process communication for a 6-year-old to demonstrate that level of fluency. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to find this child, Michael. Not just for Emma's sake, but because what you're describing suggests something extraordinary is happening, and extraordinary things in child psychology usually have extraordinary explanations." After ending the call, Michael stood at his bedroom window, looking out over the manicured grounds of his estate. Somewhere out there was a little girl named Luna, who had given his daughter something he'd been unable to provide with all his wealth and resources. A friend who could speak her language, but Emma's observation haunted him. Why did Luna look so hungry? What kind of life was this miraculous child living? And how had she ended up at Emma's school at exactly the moment when his daughter needed her most? He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for James Rodriguez, the private investigator he'd used during his messy divorce 3 years earlier. "James, it's Michael Harrison. I need you to find someone for me. A little girl about 6 years old goes by Luna. She was at Riverside Elementary today, but she's not enrolled anywhere in the district. I need to know who she is, where she comes from, and—" He paused, staring out at the darkness. "I need to know why she knows sign language better than adults who've been studying it for years." "That's an unusual request, Michael. Any particular reason you're looking for this kid?" Michael thought about Emma's smile, about the impossible conversation he'd witnessed, about the way his daughter had signed friend with a joy he'd thought was lost forever. "Let's just say she might be the answer to prayers I didn't even know I was praying." The next morning, Michael arrived at Emma's school 30 minutes before the final bell, positioning himself in the administrative office where he had a clear view of the playground. Emma had been practically vibrating with excitement at breakfast, signing "Luna Day, Luna Day," until he'd worried she might make herself sick with anticipation. Principal Matthews joined him at the window, her expression a mixture of curiosity and professional concern. "I've heard back from 6 district schools, and no one has a student matching that description. Child Services is running a search through their databases as well." "Child Services?" Michael's attention snapped from the playground to the principal's face. "Why would you involve them? A child that young, appearing alone during school hours, possibly showing signs of neglect." Principal Matthews chose her words carefully. "It's standard protocol, Mr. Harrison. If this Luna is living in an unstable situation—" "She helped my daughter," Michael interrupted, his voice sharper than intended. For the first time in 6 months, Emma smiled, really smiled. "And your response is to potentially take Luna away from whatever family she does have?" Before Principal Matthews could respond, the dismissal bell rang, and children began streaming onto the playground. Michael pressed closer to the window, scanning every small figure for dark hair and worn clothes. Emma appeared among the crowd, her head turning constantly as she searched for her new friend. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Emma's enthusiastic scanning slowed, then stopped entirely. She sat down on the same bench where she'd met Luna, her small shoulders drooping with disappointment. "Maybe she's running late," Principal Matthews said quietly. But Michael was already moving toward the door. He couldn't watch his daughter's hope drain away minute by minute, not when he had resources that could solve this problem. As he stepped onto the playground, his phone buzzed with a text from James Rodriguez. Found something interesting. Can't discuss over text. Meet me at Riverside Park in 20 minutes. Michael's pulse quickened as he approached Emma. She looked up at him with eyes that were trying very hard not to cry. "She'll come, Daddy," Emma signed, but her hands trembled slightly. "Luna promised." "I know, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-up things make it hard for children to keep their promises, but I'm going to help fix that, okay?" Emma nodded, but as they walked toward the car, she kept glancing back at the playground gate, hope and heartbreak warring in her 7-year-old features. 20 minutes later, Michael sat across from James Rodriguez on a park bench, Emma playing on the nearby swings, where she could see both adults but couldn't overhear their conversation. "This is bigger than you think, Michael," James said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the space between them. "That little girl? She's not just missing from school enrollment databases, she doesn't exist anywhere." "What do you mean?" "No birth certificate on file in this state, or the 3 surrounding ones. No medical records, no social services contact, no previous school enrollment anywhere. It's like she materialized out of thin air." James paused, studying Michael's expression. "But here's where it gets really interesting. I talked to the crossing guard who works the intersection near Riverside Elementary. She's seen a little girl matching Luna's description 3 times in the past week, always around dismissal time, always walking alone." "Walking from where?" "That's the thing. She comes from the direction of the old Millfield district. You know the area?" Michael's stomach dropped. Millfield was the part of town his company's urban development project had been scheduled to revitalize, before the funding fell through and left the area in worse shape than before. It was a collection of abandoned warehouses, condemned apartment buildings, and empty lots where the homeless population had established makeshift camps. "James, a 6-year-old can't be living in Millfield. It's not safe, it's barely habitable." "That's not the strangest part," James continued, opening the folder to reveal several photographs. "I spent yesterday evening canvassing the area, talking to some of the long-term residents about whether they'd seen a little girl. Most hadn't, but there's this one guy, Vietnam vet named Tony, who's been camping in the same spot for 2 years. He swears he's seen her, but here's the thing." James pulled out a specific photo. "He says she only appears around a particular building. This building." Michael stared at the image. A 4-story brick structure with boarded windows and a faded sign that read, "St. Catherine's Home for Children, established 1962. "It's been closed for 15 years, James continued. "Shut down after a financial scandal, building condemned, scheduled for demolition next month. But Tony swears he's seen lights in there at night, and he's heard what sounds like a child crying." "You think Luna is living in an abandoned orphanage?" "I think Luna might not be the only child who needs help," James replied grimly. "And I think whoever taught her sign language did it for a very specific reason." Michael's hands were shaking as he closed the folder. Across the playground, Emma had stopped swinging and was staring in their direction, her intuitive 7-year-old awareness picking up on the tension in the adult conversation. "I want to go there. Tonight." "Michael, if there are children living in that building illegally, this becomes a matter for authorities." "No." Michael's voice carried the steel that had built his technology empire. "Emma's teacher was right about one thing. Some solutions can't be bought, but some problems can't wait for bureaucracy either." He stood up, his decision crystallizing with each word. "Luna gave my daughter something precious yesterday. Today, Emma sat alone again, and that little girl broke a promise she probably desperately wanted to keep. If Luna is living in an abandoned building, eating whatever she can find, sleeping in a condemned structure." He looked toward Emma, who had started walking toward them with the careful steps of a child trying to read adult emotions. "Then she's not just Emma's miracle. She's a little girl who needs one of her own." And if this goes wrong, if you're walking into something dangerous. Michael picked up the folder, tucking it inside his jacket. Then at least I'll be walking toward my daughter's friend instead of away from her. As Emma reached them, she signed a question that stopped Michael's heart. "Daddy, is Luna okay?" Looking down at his daughter's worried face, Michael realized that somewhere in the past 24 hours, this had stopped being about Emma's loneliness and started being about something much more important. The possibility that love could create connections that transcended every barrier, even the ones that seemed impossible to cross. "We're going to find out, sweetheart," he signed back. "We're going to find out." That evening, as darkness settled over the city, Michael stood outside the chain-link fence surrounding St. Catherine's Home for Children, his heart hammering against his ribs. The building loomed before him like a monument to forgotten dreams. 4 stories of crumbling brick and boarded windows that seemed to absorb the streetlight rather than reflect it. "You sure about this?" James asked, adjusting the heavy-duty flashlight in his grip. "We could call child services, let them handle it properly, and wait 3 days for them to cut through red tape while a 6-year-old spends another night in a condemned building." Michael shook his head, testing the wire cutters against the fence. "Emma asked me if Luna was okay. I'm going to have an answer for her." The fence gave way with surprising ease, suggesting they weren't the first people to seek entry to the abandoned property. As they approached the main entrance, Michael noticed something that made him pause. The heavy wooden door, while weathered and paint-chipped, wasn't secured with the industrial locks he'd expected. Instead, a simple chain held it closed, one that could easily be undone from the inside. "Someone's definitely been using this place," James muttered, playing his flashlight beam across fresh footprints in the dusty entrance. Multiple someones by the look of it. They pushed through the door into what had once been the main reception area of the orphanage. Michael's flashlight illuminated a space frozen in time, a reception desk still stacked with yellowed paperwork, children's artwork still clinging to bulletin boards, and a large banner reading "Welcome Home" stretched across the far wall, its cheerful lettering now faded to ghostly whispers. But it was what they found beyond the reception area that stopped both men in their tracks. The main corridor had been transformed. Battery-powered lanterns created pools of warm light every few feet, and the walls were covered with fresh drawings, clearly the work of children depicting families holding hands, houses with smoking chimneys, and animals playing in sunny fields. Blankets had been arranged in neat sections along the walls, creating individual sleeping spaces, each marked with hand-drawn name tags. "Jesus," James whispered, counting at least 8 sleeping areas. "How many kids are living here?" Michael moved deeper into the corridor, his flashlight revealing more impossible details. A makeshift kitchen had been set up in what was once a janitor's closet, complete with canned goods stacked in organized rows and a camping stove that looked recently used. Nearby, a collection of books, all focused on sign language and deaf education, sat in a careful pile next to several notebooks filled with practice exercises. "Michael," James called softly from further down the hallway, "you need to see this." Michael followed James's voice to a doorway that opened into what had clearly been a classroom. But this room was different from the others. It felt lived in, purposeful. The walls were covered with sign language charts, and in the center of the space, a circle of small chairs surrounded a larger one, as if set up for lessons. But it was the far wall that made Michael's breath catch in his throat. Dozens of photographs were pinned there, black and white images of children, adults, and families, all captured in moments of joy and connection. And in the center of the collection, larger than the rest, was a photograph that made the world tilt sideways beneath Michael's feet. The image showed a young woman, maybe 25 years old, with dark hair and kind eyes, signing to a group of children gathered around her. But it wasn't the woman who made Michael's hands shake as he reached for the photograph. It was the small plaque mounted below it that read, "In loving memory of Maria Santos, teacher and advocate who believed that every child deserves to be heard." "Michael, what is it?" James asked, moving closer. But Michael couldn't speak. Because he knew that face, those eyes, that gentle smile. He'd seen them in his dreams for 8 years, had carried a wallet-sized version of that same photograph until his grief counselor had convinced him to put it away. Maria Santos, the woman he'd loved and lost, Emma's mother. "That's impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Maria died when Emma was 6 months old, car accident. I was there. I buried her. Michael, look at the date on this plaque." Michael's flashlight beam found the small engraving at the bottom of the memorial. "Maria Santos, 1995-2023. Forever in our hearts." "That's wrong," Michael said. But even as the words left his mouth, he was remembering details that had never quite fit. The closed casket funeral his mother-in-law had insisted upon. The rushed burial before he could say goodbye properly. The way Maria's mother had refused to let him see the medical reports, claiming it would be too painful. "Maria Santos died 2 years ago, not 8 years ago," James said gently. "According to this, she was alive until Emma was 5. The room began to spin as implications crashed over Michael like ocean waves. If Maria had been alive all this time, if she'd only died 2 years ago, then Emma's sudden hearing loss hadn't been caused by meningitis. It had been caused by something else entirely, something that had happened around the same time her mother actually died. "The children living here," Michael said, pieces clicking together with terrifying clarity. "They're all deaf, aren't they? That's why there are sign language materials everywhere, why someone taught Luna to communicate the way she does. Michael, we need to—" A sound from the corridor cut James off. The soft footsteps of someone trying to move quietly through the building. Both men froze, flashlights suddenly feeling too bright, too revealing. "Someone's here," James whispered. But Michael was already moving toward the sound, because mixed in with the careful footsteps, he could hear something else. The quiet murmur of voices speaking in sign language, hands creating conversation in the darkness. They followed the sounds to a staircase leading to the 2nd floor, where a faint glow emanated from beneath a door marked Dormitory B. Michael approached slowly, his heart pounding so hard he was sure whoever was inside could hear it. He pushed the door open just wide enough to see inside, and what he found there shattered every assumption he'd made about the past 8 years of his life. The room was set up like a classroom, but the lesson being conducted was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A woman sat in the center of a circle of children, all of them between the ages of 4 and 8, all of them communicating in fluid, beautiful sign language that made Emma's school lessons look like finger exercises. And the woman teaching them, older now, her hair streaked with silver, her face marked by years of struggle and loss, was Maria Santos, Emma's mother, his wife, the woman he'd grieved for 8 years. She was alive. Michael's flashlight slipped from his numb fingers, clattering to the floor with a sound that seemed to echo through eternity. In the sudden darkness, he heard the children's conversation stop, replaced by the kind of silence that only comes when the impossible collides with reality. "Maria," he whispered, her name torn from somewhere deep in his chest. A battery-powered lantern flicked on, casting golden light across the room and illuminating a face that was exactly as he remembered and completely transformed by time. Maria Santos, older, thinner, marked by years of hardship, stared at him with eyes that held recognition, grief, and something that might have been relief. "Hello, Michael," she said, her hands moving in sign language even as she spoke. "I wondered when you would find us." The children around her, 6 of them, ranging from Luna's age to perhaps 9 years old, pressed closer to their teacher, their eyes wide but not fearful. These were children accustomed to adults arriving unexpectedly, to conversations that would determine their fate. "You're dead," Michael said, the words sounding ridiculous even as they left his mouth. "I buried you. I mourned you. Emma mourned you." "You buried someone," Maria replied, her voice carrying an exhaustion that spoke of years of impossible choices. "But it wasn't me." Behind Michael, James cleared his throat. "I'm going to give you two some space," he said quietly. "I'll be downstairs if you need me." As James's footsteps faded, Maria stood slowly, her movements careful and deliberate. "Children," she signed, "please go to the reading room. I'll be there shortly." The children filed out silently, but Luna lingered in the doorway, her dark eyes moving between Maria and Michael with an intelligence that seemed far beyond her 6 years. "Luna," Maria signed, "this is Emma's father, the one I told you about." Luna's face lit up with sudden understanding, and she signed something rapid and excited that made Maria's lips curve in the first smile Michael had seen from her. "She says Emma is the bravest person she's ever met," Maria translated, "and that she's been waiting to thank you for raising such a wonderful daughter." After Luna disappeared down the corridor, Michael and Maria faced each other in the silence of the abandoned dormitory, 8 years of questions hanging between them like a chasm. "Start at the beginning," Michael said. "Start with why you let me think you were dead." Maria sat down heavily on one of the small chairs, suddenly looking every one of her 43 years. "Because in every way that mattered I was dead. The woman you married, the woman who lived in that house, who planned to raise Emma in comfort and security, she died the night I learned what my mother had done." "What are you talking about?" "My mother never forgave me for marrying you without her permission, for choosing love over the life she had planned for me. When Emma was born deaf—" "Emma wasn't born deaf," Michael interrupted. "She lost her hearing from meningitis when she was 5. Maria's laugh was bitter and heartbreaking. "Emma was born profoundly deaf, Michael. Just like I was. Just like my father was, and his mother before him. It's genetic, it runs in families, and my mother was terrified that you would leave me when you found out." The room tilted around Michael as memories rearranged themselves like pieces of a puzzle he'd been solving wrong for years. Emma's late speech development that doctors had attributed to personality, her unusual attachment to visual cues, and her uncanny ability to read facial expressions. The way she'd never responded to her name being called from another room, even as a toddler. "The hearing aids," he said slowly. "The ones that supposedly helped after the meningitis, were the same ones she'd been wearing since she was 6 months old, hidden by her hair, programmed to look like they were working better than they actually were." Maria's hands moved restlessly in her lap, signing fragments of sentences, even as she spoke aloud. "My mother convinced me that you would never accept a deaf child, that you would divorce me and fight for custody. She created false medical records, bribed doctors, and when Emma started school, she made sure Emma was placed in programs that would hide her deafness rather than address it. But the meningitis was real but mild. My mother used it as a cover story, a way to explain Emma's sudden need for more obvious accommodations without admitting the truth." Maria wiped tears from her eyes with hands that trembled. "By the time I realized what she had done, Emma was 5 years old and had never learned proper sign language, never been part of a deaf community, never understood that her condition wasn't something to hide or be ashamed of." Michael sank onto another small chair, his mind reeling. "So you faked your own death?" "I discovered that my mother had been stealing money from the charity I worked for, money meant to help deaf children. When I confronted her, she told me everything, about the lies, about Emma, about how she planned to keep controlling our lives forever." Maria's voice broke. I realized that I had spent 5 years letting my daughter suffer in silence because I was too afraid to fight for her. You could have come to me. We could have worked through it together. Could we? Maria's eyes met his, and he saw decades of pain reflected there. You never learned sign language, Michael. Even when Emma was struggling in school, even when she was obviously different from other children, you threw money at the problem instead of learning to communicate with your own daughter. How was I supposed to believe you would accept the truth? The accusation hit like a physical blow because it was true. Michael had hired tutors and therapists and specialists, but he had never sat down to learn the language his daughter needed most. He had treated her deafness like a problem to be solved, rather than a difference to be embraced. The car accident, he said quietly, was staged. My mother knew someone who could create the right paperwork, the right records. I let you think I was dead, because I thought it was the only way to protect Emma from the lies that were destroying her life. But Emma lost her hearing around the same time. Emma stopped pretending she could hear around the same time I died, Maria corrected. She was grieving, Michael. Children who are grieving sometimes stop trying to hide who they are. Her teachers probably interpreted her behavioral changes as hearing loss, and the narrative fit so perfectly with what my mother had set up that no one questioned it. Michael put his head in his hands, trying to process the enormity of what had been stolen from all of them. 8 years, Maria. Emma needed her mother for 8 years, and you were here in an abandoned building, teaching other people's children instead of your own. I was learning how to be the mother Emma deserved, Maria said fiercely. I was working with deaf children, learning their language, understanding their world. I was becoming someone who could help Emma instead of someone who was failing her. And Luna is. Maria paused, choosing her words carefully. Luna is special. She came to us 6 months ago, brought by a woman who found her living on the streets. She learned sign language faster than anyone I've ever seen, almost like she was born knowing it. And when I told her about Emma, about a little girl her age, who was struggling with the same challenges these children face, she decided to find Emma herself. She's been asking to meet Emma for weeks. When she found out where Emma went to school, nothing could stop her from going there. Michael looked around the makeshift classroom, at the careful organization, the educational materials, the evidence of a woman who had spent 8 years preparing to be the parent she wished she had been from the beginning. Emma thinks you're dead, Maria. She spent 2 years believing she lost her mother. And I've spent 2 years believing I lost my daughter, Maria replied, tears streaming down her face. But when Luna came back yesterday, signing about this amazing girl who played with wooden horses and smiled like sunshine, she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I knew it was time to stop hiding from the biggest mistake of my life. Outside, Michael could hear the voices of children settling in for sleep, their hands creating conversations in the darkness. Somewhere among them was Luna, the little girl who had given Emma her first real friend and unknowingly led Michael to the truth about his family. What happens now? He asked. Maria stood up, her decision written in every line of her body. Now I do what I should have done 8 years ago, she said. I tell my daughter the truth, and I pray that she can forgive me for all the years I spent being afraid instead of being brave. 3 days later, Michael stood in the playground of Riverside Elementary, watching Emma pace nervously near the bench where she had first met Luna. For 3 days, he had wrestled with how to tell his daughter that everything she believed about her life was built on lies, designed to protect her from a truth that was actually beautiful. Doctor. Sarah Chen had spent hours with them, helping Michael understand how to approach a revelation that would reshape Emma's entire understanding of herself and her family. But in the end, it was Emma herself who made the decision easier. Daddy, she had signed that morning at breakfast, I dreamed about Mommy again, but this time she wasn't gone. This time she was teaching children to talk with their hands, just like Luna taught me. Now, as the final school bell rang and children streamed onto the playground, Michael felt his phone buzz with a message from Maria. "We're here." Emma spotted Luna first, emerging from the same gate where she had appeared 3 days ago. But this time, Luna wasn't alone. A woman walked beside her, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face marked by years of struggle and growth. Michael watched his daughter's face as recognition dawned, not the logical recognition of a photograph or a memory, but the deeper recognition of a connection that transcends time and explanation. Emma's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief and desperate hope. "Mommy?" she signed, the word trembling in the air between them. Maria knelt down 30 feet from her daughter, her own hands shaking as she signed back. "Hello, my beautiful girl. I have been waiting so long to see you." What happened next would stay with Michael for the rest of his life. Emma ran toward her mother with the wild abandon of a child who has suddenly discovered that miracles are real, that the impossible can happen, that love can resurrect itself from grief and bloom again in the most unexpected places. But just before she reached Maria's arms, Emma stopped. She turned back to Luna, who had been standing quietly nearby, and signed something that made both women smile through their tears. "Thank you for finding my mommy for me." Luna beamed and signed back. "Thank you for being my first real friend." Then Emma was in Maria's arms, 8 years of separation dissolving in a moment of recognition that neither distance nor lies nor fear could ultimately destroy. Michael watched his family reunite and felt pieces of his heart that he hadn't even realized were broken begin to slowly heal. Later, as they sat together on the playground bench, all 4 of them, the family that had been scattered and lost and found again, Maria told Emma the truth. Not all of it. Not the parts that would only create more pain, but the essential truth that mattered most. "I made a mistake," Maria signed, her hands gentle and sure. "I was scared that Daddy wouldn't love us if he knew you were born deaf, so I tried to hide who you were. But hiding who you are is never the right choice, because who you are is perfect." Emma listened with the serious attention of a 7-year-old trying to understand adult complexities, her hands forming careful questions. "Were you sad when you were away from me?" "Every single day," Maria replied, "but I was also learning how to be a better mommy for you, and I was taking care of other children who needed help, just like Luna." "Will Luna come live with us now?" Michael and Maria exchanged glances over Emma's head. They had talked about this, about the 6 other children living in the abandoned orphanage, about Luna, whose origins remained a mystery even as her impact on their lives grew clearer every day. "Luna has some decisions to make," Michael said carefully. "But whatever happens, she will always be part of our family now." As the afternoon stretched toward evening, the 4 of them walked together toward Michael's car. But Luna stopped at the playground gate, her small hand resting on the chain link as she looked back at the school where everything had changed. "What is it, sweetheart?" Maria asked, kneeling beside her. Luna signed something complex, her 6-year-old hands forming words with the fluency that still amazed everyone who saw it. Maria translated, her voice filled with wonder. "She says that sometimes people think miracles are big, loud things that everyone notices. But really, miracles are quiet things that happen when someone lonely finds someone else who understands their language." Michael looked at his daughter, chattering excitedly with her mother in the flowing, beautiful language he had finally started learning. He looked at Luna, the mysterious child who had appeared at exactly the right moment to bridge impossible gaps. He looked at Maria, who had spent 8 years becoming the person she needed to be, to give Emma the gift of belonging to a community that celebrated rather than hid her deafness. "She's right," he said, pulling out his phone to call Dr. Chen about expanding Emma's therapy to include family sign language lessons, and then to call his lawyer about the legal steps needed to bring Maria home and to explore options for Luna and the other children from St. Catherine's. Sometimes miracles look like little girls who know sign language they've never learned, and sometimes they look like mothers who love their children enough to disappear so they can learn to love them better. 6 months later, the Harrison family, now including Luna, who had officially become Emma's sister, stood in the main corridor of the newly renovated St. Catherine's Home for Children, which had been transformed from an abandoned building into a thriving community center for deaf children and their families. Emma and Luna ran ahead, their hands dancing through animated conversations as they showed new students around their favorite rooms. Maria worked in the office she had designed herself, developing programs that would ensure no child would ever have to choose between hiding who they were and being loved for who they were. And Michael, who had spent most of his adult life believing that the right amount of money could solve any problem, had learned that the most important things in life couldn't be bought. They could only be built. One conversation at a time, one sign at a time, one moment of understanding at a time. The wooden horse Emma had played with during her loneliest days now sat on a shelf in the center's main room, surrounded by dozens of toys donated by families who had found their way to St. Catherine's. But it was no longer a solitary toy for a solitary game. Now it was part of a collection that children shared, creating elaborate adventures together in a language that belonged to all of them. Sometimes, late at night when the center was quiet, Michael would find Emma and Luna in the main room, their hands creating stories in the darkness, their friendship a daily reminder that the most profound connections happen not despite our differences, but because of them. And sometimes, when he watched them together, he could almost see the moment when everything changed, when a lonely little girl met another lonely little girl, and two different kinds of silence discovered that they were actually the same language, just waiting for the right person to help them find their voice.